Back in the year 2022, a journalist from Time magazine travelled to Ukraine and met the President Zelenskyy. The invasion had just started from Russia and the capital was in despair. In a meeting with Zelenskyy, the Time journalist referenced getting weapons for Ukraine possibly by the end of the year. Zelenskyy looked disappointed. End of the year, he said? You think this war will go on for more than a year? Poor Zelenskyy and poor Ukraine. This war has gone on for more than just 1 year. But it's not a surprise to war historians. The Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, after all, took nearly a decade. And Russia's invasion of Chechnya took, 2 stages. But there could now be light at the end of this rather long tunnel. European leaders, the USA, and even Zelenskyy are starting to align on where they think this war could end. According to Zelenskyy, it should be no longer than the end of next year. Some sources inside the Ukrainian government are also suggesting that Zelenskyy has become more flexible in terms of what he will accept for a peace plan. A couple of years ago, Zelenskyy had a rather long list of things that he wanted to get from Russia in a peace plan. They included doing a deal with Russia as long as Putin was no longer leader and getting Crimea back. Reasonable if you are Ukrainian, but from a Russian standpoint, difficult. That's changing, and Zelenskyy's plans for peace are starting to involve the reclaiming of land a little bit less. In an interview with ABC News, Zelenskyy said the plan was now a bridge to a diplomatic way out and, of course, to stop the war. This is not because of goodwill on Ukraine's part to Russia. No, it's because some of Ukraine's allies and its critics are pressuring Ukraine to finish this war sooner rather than later. There have been impatient voices even inside NATO from the likes of Hungary and Slovakia. Slovakia said they would withhold their support for Ukraine, and Hungary has basically said, what's the point? You're not going to beat Russia. And of course, if you look at the USA, there is a wishy-washy approach to how the Republicans would deal with Ukraine as well. Trump does publicly say that he would withhold funding from Ukraine if he became president, but then at the same time he acknowledges that NATO doesn't want to get involved in a war if Russia were to expand beyond Ukraine's borders. Ukraine can't fight Russia alone, it needs support, and if that support starts to wither away, then Ukraine will have a very simple choice: resign or burn out. Russia can afford to fight the war for longer than Ukraine as well. Russia has more troops, and while the stats do vary, at one point Russia was firing 2 to 3 times more shells than Ukraine. And so now many in the USA and Europe are saying this won't end with an outright victory, but it will end at the negotiating table. Very exciting. And that is thought because the war is starting to reach a stalemate. Both for Ukraine and Russia, there's just not a lot of progress at this stage. Yes, Ukraine took a little bit of Kursk, and yes, Russia has been slowly taking more of Ukraine's east. But have a look at this map. The shades in red show what Russia has managed to take, and it is just less than 20% of Ukraine. Now look at these maps. This is a map of the last 2 years and the progress Russia has made in taking Ukraine. It's impressive, Ukraine's a big piece of land. But it's also not that impressive from Russia's standpoint. Russia went into Ukraine at the start of the war hoping to take Kyiv in 3 days. Not quite the case. While Putin will not yet admit it, if he were to go to the negotiating table and take 20% of Ukraine's land, most of the east, and keep Crimea, he would go back to his people and claim that as a victory. Likewise, if Zelenskyy were to walk away and say, hey, we've joined NATO and I've ended the war, then he could kind of claim victory too. No, not really. This, of course, would not be beneficial to Ukraine. Some would argue that losing 20% of its land would be terrible. And also, what kind of message would that send out to the bullies of the world? If you want to grab some land, just pop one down with a bit of war, wait it out, and you'll be alright. And what would that say about America and the West's defense of their allies? Don't worry if they get involved. Once they get bored, they'll give it up at the negotiating table. There is, of course, the issue that if Russia were to take 20% of Ukraine's land, what's to stop them regrouping and going for a second attempt again later on in the future? But even Ukraine's allies now, such as the President of the Czech Republic, have said that Ukraine should be realistic about regaining some of its territory. The Czech Republic's leader argued that the most likely outcome of the war was that a part of Ukrainian territory would remain under Russian occupation for a number of years. Uh-oh. He added in an interview with The Times that the conflict would end not with an outright victory, but with something in between. As for the hopes of a NATO membership, that might sell it to some Ukrainians, but it's unlikely to happen in the first place. Even America, one of Ukraine's biggest allies, is lukewarm on Ukraine joining NATO. So Zelenskyy has tried to get around that, and in his peace plan he has said, okay, let's pause NATO. What if you guys just give me a security agreement where if I'm struck, such as an invasion by Russia, you guys jump to my defense as if I was in NATO? But even that's looking like a stretch. Likewise, Russia has also said that if peace talks were to take place, Ukraine's NATO membership would make those peace talks impossible. Nevertheless, in his interview with ABC, Zelenskyy said that he thought peace was closer than most people thought. When the invasion first started, Zelenskyy was caught off guard when that journalist from The Times I mentioned said the war could last more than a year. Nowadays, when it comes to the topic of peace, Zelenskyy seems more confident.